exoteric and esoteric, the public and the secret dimensions of religion. From the Aletheon, Volume 1, page 130. The divine avataric self-revelation of his divine presence, Avatar Adidar Samraj. The dominant religions of the present time are, fundamentally, exoteric traditions that exist in order to serve social purposes. The purposes that are of interest to the state and to the human public collective as a whole. Exoteric religion is intended to inspire human beings to behave well socially. In other words, to behave in a manner that supports order and productivity in society. In one manner or another, exoteric religions have always been associated with this purpose. However, in contrast to exoteric religions, esoteric religions or paths or ways have not been communicated to the public masses. That is why they are called esoteric. Their teachings were supposed to be kept secret, and thus and thereby reserved for the few who were truly prepared to understand and rightly practice them. Sufism, for example, is associated with the tradition of Islam, yet many exoterically acculturated Muslims oppose Sufism because of its esoteric tendencies. Some Orthodox Muslims even regard Sufism to be heretical, yet Sufism is always there, fully within the total tradition of Islam. Sufi schools exist in all Islamic countries, and they often function quite openly in direct coincidence with the otherwise exoteric tradition of Islam. Likewise, in Christian cultures there are mystics, and historically, the Christian mystics have been suppressed and even persecuted by the ecclesiastical authorities to whom they were subject. Some have even had to keep their writings secret. One such mystic, Teresa of Avila, is now a doctor of the Catholic Church. Yet, in her lifetime, Teresa of Avila was very much suppressed and controlled by her ecclesiastical superiors. Indeed, mysticism has always been treated with suspicion and always been subordinate by the exoteric authorities in all times and in all traditions, and especially so in the West and in the Middle East. Gnosticism, which is an ancient form of esoteric mysticism and in some cases of spirituality, was suspect from the exoteric perspective, especially within the early period of Christian institutionalizing, because even Christian Gnosticism suggested a universal and therefore not exclusively Christian truth. The Gnostic truth that must be realized is not merely a truth about social behavior. Therefore, it was feared among the exoteric Christian orthodoxy that, perhaps, the mystical experience valued by the Gnostics would lead people out of the social domain and into ascetical or otherwise libertine practices, and make them so ecstatic or otherwise grossly intoxicated, they would be unwilling to or unable to work. Chronically, and even inherently exoteric religion has concerns of this kind about esotericism in general, and therefore exoteric religion has historically always suppressed esotericism of every kind. In India, there is historically a great deal of esotericism. Traditionally, everyone in India has been aware that the intensive paths of esotericism were there among them and available to anyone who was willing to embrace the difficult requirements of esoteric practice. Another characteristic of the Society of India is that it has traditionally taken into account and thus even justified the fact that many people are poor. In traditional India, the fact of poverty was and is always accepted as part of the reality of human existence. Coincidentally, because possible poverty was presumed to be an integral and irreducible characteristic of human life, anyone, even if living in great wealth, could, as a matter of his or her commitment to esotericism, intentionally choose to be poor and thus to renounce all worldly possessions and even all worldly relations and worldly modes of self-identity. Thus, in traditional India, it was and is presumed that the social order would not miss a few thousand ecstatics who have put on robes and gone begging. Such a choice, it was thought, is acceptable as long as it does not catch on like wildfire, such that everybody becomes an ecstatic. In India, while most people are content with popular exoteric religion, a special allowance is usually made for those who become especially serious. Therefore, it is commonly accepted that some people find that living an ordinary life is not sufficient, and that they are discouraged with a life that is devoted merely to being productive in some conventional sense. However, because of the characteristic nature of traditional Indian social contracts and the idealization of poverty as an obligation for all who would professionally leave the world and thus and thereby embrace an esoteric path, especially serious individuals are generally, or in most conventionally organized esoteric schools, expected to become interested in an ascetical life and thus to renounce and dissociate from the communal and familial social associations and social obligations that people in India are otherwise strongly expected to uphold. Many traditions, both East and West, have an esoteric back door. In other words, esoteric possibilities are available to those who are most advanced or most serious, or who feel they have outgrown the more rudimentary aspects of religious practice. Such individuals may simply be prone to a more ecstatic or mystical disposition than the ordinary person, and therefore regardless of the exoteric social teachings and expectations that are generally associated with their tradition. They find their way into some circumstance or to some literature or to some teacher that points them beyond the merely exoteric form of the tradition. Nevertheless, even in India, where there are many esoteric traditions and where esoteric teachings and schools are practiced have been rather openly known for many centuries, the highest percentage of people have not chosen to practice such things. The usual individual, East or West, is more inclined and generally exclusively acculturated toward worldly pursuits, although in the general case, with some coincident exoteric religious orientation, that involves one or another mode of temporal life, and also the practice associated with the conventional religious instructions on social morality that are given within the orthodox sphere of temporal life under the influence of exoteric religious authority. Da, da, da.